I'm Keith Walker, and I will be talking about how the brain of a middle schooler works. This will be an examination of reading comprehension skills. The middle school brain is fascinating. This adolescent group thinks in patterns and frequently talk in code. My role as their instructor is to understand how they learn to read and comprehend as a reciprocal process. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm a middle school teacher, and these are the things that I experience within my own classroom. To bridge this connection, I will discuss how middle schoolers age 11 through 13 process and comprehend reading skills by analyzing the brain of this age group, discussing critical periods in reading, determining the importance of interleave practice and memory retention, and then finally defining how reading comprehension is a reciprocal process. In analyzing the brain of an adolescent, Blackmore and Robbins, 2012, argues that decision-making in adolescent brain is risky. Because the rational system matures slowly, in adolescence, they are more likely to submit to their emotions, which is very, very true given that the age group of 11 to 13-year-olds in a classroom all day long, they're impulsive. And with that being said, their heightened risky taking activity heightens their impulsiveness. So that means that if you're asking them to do something, most of the time they won't do it. And in some cases, they're they jump out at you, or either they get angry, and they're getting angry because they can't process what you're asking them to do. So as Sosa was saying in his book, teens are more likely to give into their emotions because of the rational system. It's maturing slowly, and with that being maturing slowly, they really don't know how to respond to the things that they don't know how to respond to you. And so in that case, you need to take a few steps back and think about their social influences that could possibly be triggering their emotions. So for example, students with who has a high need for peer approval will tend to act out a little bit more because they are looking for the approval of their peers, whereas the one who sits back in a classroom would just partake in risky behavior just because they just want some sort of attention. So they're doing these things because they can't wrap their brains are not mature enough to rationalize the situation and rationalize the things that they're doing. And part of this could be from their home life as well. In another study written by Reed, Larson, and friends, they argued that the brain changes as a result of media and social influences, which is completely true given that David Sosa also says that the brain changes its own properties as a result of experience. So if we are constantly watching negative things on TV and seeing negative behavior in a classroom, the students are more likely to repeat or mimic those same behaviors, thereby we need to address it at the forefront and showing the students the proper way to act in a classroom and a proper way to get their anger and emotions under control so they can start to learn. In continuing with analyzing the brain of an adolescent, we also need to pay attention to how the growth neurons strengthen by diet and exercise. So if they are not properly eating or properly exercising, then the attention span is definitely going to occur. So basically, what David Sosa was saying is that it's difficult for an individual to concentrate cognitively if they're not eating properly. And on the other hand, Bashlu and friends did a study of 605 adolescents aged 11 to 18 and investigated that children who habitually skip breakfast tend to have lower grades. So if you're not coming to school well nourished, well rested, you are definitely not ready to learn. And if you're not ready to learn, you can't possibly maintain the focus that you need to learn to read. And in that case, many students and teachers tend to not eat breakfast with sufficient glucose or drink enough water during the day for a healthy brain function. So if your brain is not functioning properly, you definitely can't think properly. If you're not thinking properly, you can't read properly. If you're not reading properly, you're angry, you're distressed, and all these other different social influence issues that we talked about in the previous slide comes out. So food choices definitely affect the brain function. And so although some teachers tend to drink caffeine to help balance out their day, some parents are actually giving caffeine to their children, that it's supposed to be okay in small amounts, but in many cases it's seen that in ADD children, caffeine tends to mellow them down and have them focusing for the morning, but when the afternoon comes, they are not ready to be a part of the classroom and they're typically pulled. And when they're pulled, they're not learning. If they're not learning, they're not growing. So in essence, before we can even get the child or the student ready to begin the beginning parts of reading, we need to make sure that they have the proper social influences, they have a great home environment, and they're also coming to school well nourished and ready to learn. But that's not always the case. Keep in mind, this is speaking specifically to a normal brain student. What have these ideas do not fit when you have a medically diagnosed student. So then there comes the critical periods in reading. In a previous statement, and in the previous assignment, I stated that learning to read is a daunting and difficult task for the brain. So according to David Sosa, brain activity has made the most contributions to teaching and learning to date, specifically reading as a reciprocal process. And I say that because we we learn and read through pictures and patterns. And so if we are learning to read through pictures and patterns, we then apply a sound check to what those pictures and patterns look like. And then we associate a word with that in a particular meaning. And then we do sound production. So in my case, let's say the picture would be a boy. Well, everybody is not a boy, so we would have to go to individual sounds with the and then the Y sound, which is boy, or the OY sound, which is usually combining letters goes a little later in the reading process, but that's just to give you a background of how it works. But if you start with like ball or dog, you start with the picture and then you do a sound check with individual syllables and then you go for word meaning and then you get sound production. There are a lot of critical periods in reading. For example, the brain changes as a result of experience, which we previously talked about, and especially for a middle schooler who begins to read novels and express themselves through literature, they develop a sense of self. The problem being, if they can't exactly make meaning to the things that they're reading, this may affect their behavior, this may cause the student to withdraw, and this may definitely cause an impact on the growth mindset. So, for example, students who can't read or can't read at proper grade level may get antsy and fidgety within the classroom, and this will cause the student to go through a range of emotions. And Cook and Thomas wrote an article that looked at um, secondary students who understood adolescent shame and pride and used their perceptions on academic competence. So basically what it's saying is that students tend to withdraw when they don't understand what things are doing. And so the results that reveal a negative relationship between growth mindset and daily shame intensity. So the more they were made fun of, the more the more they were made fun of, their growth mindset depleted. So you need to kind of, well, as teachers, we have to kind of balance out what we are reading and making sure that if we are asking students to do a read aloud, that we are paying attention to those body languages and those verbal cues that maybe this is not the best idea for that student, so the student is not acting out and therefore can have the best possible experience during this critical period for them. You don't want them to withdraw. You want to definitely have them have that growth mindset that Carol DeWitt was talking about to help them understand that you want them to have a not yet versus the you can't read type of feeling. And to do this, you also might want to think about a reward process. And the reward process it could be something as small as just internalized motivation or little check marks each time they read a sentence. It varies from student to student. So when thinking about the critical periods of reading, you want to make sure that the student has the basic background for reading, so they can be able to analyze and make those necessary connections from one activity to the next, because it definitely will affect how they see themselves during reading trials and how they are affected when they are reading in front of people, and what type of student they turn out to be if they are not following what the expectation that was set in front of them in front of their classroom. And in order to help them maintain certain skill levels, we have to use certain practices. And one of the practices that we should be using is interleave practice, which the interleave practice basically has is consistent with altering the practice between two or more skills. So with reading, if you are understanding what verbs are or understanding how a sentence is made up, then you want to make sure you are practicing that skill within this context. So if you are reading a novel, you want to definitely pick out those nouns, pick out those verbs. And if you are reading just regular sentences, make sure the student is understanding, okay, this is a subject, this is a predicate, versus just giving them rote memory and not attaching meaning to it. And so when you do this, you want to make sure you are actually reading along with them. And in one of the articles we read for class, that writing would be an interleave practice because sentences need to have a subject and verb agreement, like I was just stating, along with correct spelling, grammar, and complexity. Unknowingly, when we teach writing, we are using interleave practice skills by allowing students to alternate between skills and subjects. So if they are writing for me in my ELA class, they can be writing about something dealing with social studies. Or if they're in social studies and they're writing and they're just writing, they are using both social studies skills and ELA skills interweaving. And then the same goes for math and the social sciences as well. Before we get to reading as a reciprocal process, we want to make sure that we discuss the idea that to change the behaviors of reading, we must first attack the reading problem by assessing and correcting in phases. So we can't do it all at one time. So if the child is having an issue understanding what certain sounds are, we have to attack that skill. And if they are having an issue with blending, we have to attack that skill. So we have to make sure we know and understand our student. And although interleave practice is used, although space practice is used in consistently with math, it can be accomplished with reading as well. But you want to make sure you are using other skills you want to make sure you're using other skills. Reading is not a natural ability according to Sosa. It's one of the most hardest things to do. Skill sets are milestone required, so if the child is not readily ready to read a certain level, then the brain won't process it, because keep in mind that the adolescent brain is still growing and it grows at a much slower rate than many adults. And so, if they don't feel physically safe or emotionally secure, students won't learn as well. So we have to keep all these in mind. And we also need to understand that past experiences, when we are having students read certain things, can affect how and what they learn. So, in other words, if they are not ready to read certain things, their brain won't process it. And this all affects their self-concept, and it can describe the way we see ourselves in the world and how the students see themselves. So students participate in learning activities that they have yielded success. And so if they can read level A book, they're going to keep reading level A book. But it's up to us to force that skill upon them and have them go to that level B. They may struggle a bit, but as long as they are trying, they will understand that they will succeed. And so to help them do that, we need to have them look at themselves, the role as a student, and then we have to understand our role as a teacher. So our role as a teacher is to understand that the brain cannot multitask. It can focus on only one task at a time. So knowing that, we have to make sure we are giving students one thing to do at a time until they are comfortable with that skill. Then we can allow them multi-step skills. Once we have done that, then we can move on to understanding that young brains respond better with technology. And so if that's the case, the environment that we are currently growing up in with them allows us to use this technology or assisted technology in a classroom, take advantage of that. And if they are better at listening to something being read to them and then repeat, then let them do that. So as you can understand that there's just a process of looking at the picture at the bottom where it says design, develop, analyze, and evaluate. So we want to design a curriculum or a lesson that is modeled for the student and then develop the skills that they need or to help the students develop the skills that they need. And then by doing that, we want to give them graphics and then allow them some think time. And while they're allowing them some think time, find those best practices. And we find those best practices by analyzing how students look at reading and how students sound at reading. So if they are ready to move on, then we find those activities that allow them to progress. And for those who are still lagging behind, then we just need to evaluate our process and take a few steps back. And that will allow us as instructors to fully understand the brain as a reciprocal process in adolescence. And so as we continue to develop a more scientifically based understanding about today's novel brain, we must decide how this new knowledge should change what we do in schools and classes around us. That's from David Sosa. And then as teachers, we tend to teach the way we learn. So understanding our classroom needs understanding our classroom needs, we will better be able to help our students transform their reading and comprehension ability. And so we won't have that withdrawn student in the background. We won't have those negative effects in the classroom. We can give our student that growth mindset by building those literature skills with interleaved practices that can also be given in a differentiated manner. So if they need a graphic, if they need a picture, if they need something extra to write with, if they need to watch a video, if they need you to model it a couple of times, then that's what needs to be done in the classroom so that students can understand that we are there to help them through this and there's no need for them to have those internalized emotions and they can think it out, talk it out, and therefore have the best reading experience. Here are the resources I used to put this PowerPoint presentation together.